Greetings and welcome to the Matt Asher Radio Show, coming at you from Moray Bay Studios, where the waters are shallow and the conversations are deep. Each week on the show, we explore the unknown knowns, the fringes of science and culture, the borderlands between truth and possibility. Few guests exemplify this borderland more than the person I'll be talking with today. He is Jeremy Kauffman, CEO and co-founder of a technology platform called Library, spelled LBRY. Before we get to that, though, a couple notes. We recorded an episode live at the Key West Theater on August 19th. If you weren't there, you missed out, but you haven't missed out completely. That show is now available on the podcast feed or at mattasher.com. It includes my conversation with Vaughn Scribner about his book, Merpeople, A Human History. We talk about the long history of mermaids and tritons, their male counterparts in religion, science, and culture. The show also includes live music from the always brilliant Miles Mancuso. Make sure to download that episode and keep listening to the show for an announcement about our next live event. And also note that the email address for the show is info@moraybay.com. That's info@moraybay.com. Send along all your feedback, good or bad. And now, without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to bring on my guest, Jeremy Kauffman, to talk about his Odyssey. Jeremy, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here with you today.
It's great to have you on the show. We both have technical backgrounds, but most of the audience here doesn't. So I'm hoping we can talk about your platform without getting too deep into the woods, since one of the topics will be blockchain, and please don't tune out just yet if you're thinking about that. Let's start with a bridge to something that almost everybody understands, the spreadsheet. For the purposes of this conversation, think of blockchains like a shared spreadsheet that you can add rows to, but nothing can be edited once it's added. That's it. There are all kinds of rules about how these rows are to be added and how we make sure the information is correct, but that's it. From my understanding, Library is a blockchain for content, or more precisely, data about content. Tell us about how Library came about and what problem it solves.
Well, that's absolutely correct, and I will answer your question, but to start in the shallowest way possible, what I'll say is there's a website called Odyssey, O-D-Y-S-E-E. It's built on top of the Library technology. It's the easiest thing to use in the world. It passes the mom test. My mom can use it. My grandparents can use it. It is very user-friendly, and it's used by more than 40 million people each month to watch videos, to share content. Now, part of why people are excited about it is this Library technology behind it, which is pretty revolutionary. But in the same way that the internal combustion engine was revolutionary, you don't need to know how it works to drive your car, right? I was going to say you turn the key, but you don't do that anymore. You push the button, but it just works. And so Odyssey just works. And we're going to dig into the cool stuff behind it on this show. But you don't have to, if you're, I don't want to lose people and have them feel like, oh, it's really this complex thing. We describe how an engine works, it's complex. Driving a car is not complex, right? And so Odyssey lets you drive the car. Very easy, very popular, big name content creators on there. A lot of people say it's like YouTube was a decade ago, where it's more independent, kind of more freewheeling, and all kinds of interesting things you can find on there. But I'll bring it back to your question, which is what is Library and how does it work? And Library is a blockchain-based publishing protocol. It's a decentralized protocol. That means that there's not one place where the entire system is controllable. It has properties quite similar to Bitcoin, but it's doing it in this space of digital publishing rather than trying to be money.
To get back to that idea of it being easy to use, I did go on the Odyssey site, and there's a tool there to import all of your videos from YouTube, and I did that, and that seemed to work perfectly well. So you don't have to understand the technology to get in and use it. If you're familiar with YouTube, you'll be very familiar with the interface and how things work there, and can get your content ported over. Though, why would you bother using your service if YouTube already exists?
Well, YouTube, I think, has become very sort of, I don't know if you want to attribute it to them being political. It's clear that their policies are unpopular with creators and users alike. One word for what YouTube has become might be paternalistic. The CEO and various executives are on record saying that they specifically show you things that are unpopular with their users because they think it's important that you see them. YouTube gives huge boosts to things like CNN and MSNBC and these corporate news channels. It's no longer focused on the kind of independent content creator that made them big. There's even these sort of secret scores that they assign to each channel that's basically how trustworthy does YouTube think this person is. And if YouTube doesn't like you, your content won't get shown to people. And part of what's different about our approach is all of our algorithms are open. Everything we do is what's called open source, which means they can be read by computer science professionals and by technical professionals. So there's no secrets. There's no ability for this secret kind of manipulation to happen, which I think basically all of these Silicon Valley companies are doing to us. And so, the way that we're doing things, it's much more open, it's much more transparent, it's much more fair. And that's part of why it's been such a success. Odyssey literally didn't exist a year ago, and it's grown to 40 million people already. That's some pretty rapid growth, and it shows how frustrated people are with the status quo.
It's very impressive, especially because any kind of hosting platform, in particular videos, has the chicken and egg problem or the network effects problem, where you want people to use your service, but if you go on a video service and you see there's only 3 videos there, well, you're not going to join and you're not going to add your own videos there. There's no people there. There's no videos. Why would you bother? How did you go about getting over that initial hurdle of having enough content and users to make it worth even visiting the website?
Yeah, well, Odyssey did cheat in this regard because it was built on top of Library. Library is several years older, and so Library did spend years kind of building up that content catalog to the point where we have hundreds of thousands of creators and I think we're certainly at well over 10 million videos, so pretty diverse catalog. One of the things we did to solve these sort of chicken and egg problems was we came up with this idea of the YouTube sync program. So in the early days of Library, we would reach out to creators and say, hey, you can put all of your content on this new blockchain-based platform. You'll earn some of the Library cryptocurrency for doing that, and it's no work for you, right? You press a button, and it just kind of all magically happens. And so, if you can go to someone with a sort of heads you win, tails nothing happens proposition, those propositions are very appealing. They're the kinds of bets you should look for in life. Something good could happen to me, but if it doesn't happen, nothing bad happens. And that's sort of the offer we were able to give creators. And of course, there are also a lot of creators who are keyed into the fact that blockchain is I'm not going to say it's the future of all of the internet, but it's definitely changing the internet. It's the future in a lot of ways, and we've really been at the cutting edge of that. There's really no one doing blockchain-based kind of video or blockchain-based publishing the way that we are.
I'm talking with Jeremy Kaufman, the founder of the video sharing website Odyssey, and we're talking in part about this idea of censorship or algorithm manipulation, which is in some sense inevitable. Any website that's going to display videos has to decide what videos are going to be featured, what you're going to see when you get there, how the search works. every search algorithm is going to be different in terms of which results it surfaces. And you mentioned that at Odyssey, these algorithms are open source, which it means that people can see and understand, if they're more technical, how they work and why they're seeing what they see when they go to the first page or do a search. One of the big concerns you mentioned is censorship. This is when these companies are either spiking a video or sometimes just doing things that are like a shadow ban, which if people don't know is it just makes it harder to find the content. You may have uploaded it. People may be able to see it if they go directly to that page, but it's effectively disappeared from their search algorithm. What is the approach that Odyssey is taking, and how is that different from the underlying platform library in terms of the availability of content and who is able to publish what?
Yeah, and the shadow banning in particular is almost the most nefarious, because when your video is deleted, when your channel is just put at the bottom of the results, and there are examples where there are channels where the channel was allowed to remain on YouTube, but you could literally type in the name of the channel and it wouldn't show up in the first several pages of results. And it came out, you can Google like leaked YouTube P-scores or something and find these news articles about where YouTube was accidentally leaking this information to the public, and it became known that the sort of thing that people suspected was true was confirmed, where they'll just put this big negative weight on a channel and make sure that it's not getting returned. And even the deletions were unprecedented, where you have there's dozens of medical doctors, elected officials. Even the former president of the United States basically was not allowed to share content on these sites. And so it's tough to say that there's not some kind of political motivations here. And so our approach is we're much more apolitical, we're much more hands-off, and we're very inclusive in what we allow. Now, we're not trying to put edgy stuff or provocative stuff. It's, we see it as people have the right to make choices for themselves, and that's sort of our guiding philosophy in how we code and design everything. Getting into how the algorithms work specifically is a complex subject, but again, our solutions are public, and they are, for people who are more technical, they can interpret them and read them.
Still on that topic of censorship, decisions have to be made about that, and you can say yes, that's in the algorithm, but you do have to prevent certain people from using this. Does that extend down to the platform library, or are you just blocking people at the level of Odyssey? Yeah,
it's questionable whether the word I do sometimes call library a platform. Is it even a platform? Is Bitcoin a platform? It's library is a decentralized technology. So at the level of the blockchain, we don't have the ability to reach into your computer and take away your publishing key. So at the decentralized library blockchain level, there's not one place to control the network, and that's not really any different than, say, email. There's not one place that, you can't call up the CEO of email and say, hey, take this email out of this guy's inbox. That's not the way that email works. So library is in some sense a return to the more traditional form of the web, where there's not one place to control it all. And so library is no different from that. At the level of Odyssey, we do have some content policies and content guidelines. It's not completely anything goes. We do think it's more fairer than YouTube is. But for example, you can't post adult content. You can't encourage people to go commit acts of violence or acts of terrorism and this kind of thing. So there are rules, and that stuff cannot be entirely handled via algorithms, so we do have a staff that processes reports and responds to and makes those kinds of decisions. But again, everything we're doing is public. We're not hiding it. We're not trying to do these kinds of secret manipulations in terms of how we deal with it.
Getting back to that initial analogy so that people understand how this works, the write-only spreadsheet, the spreadsheet that anyone with the proper permission or key, as you say, can add to, The idea is that this exists, it's out there. Anyone who wants can join this decentralized network and add to that pool of data about content. But what you guys at Odyssey decide to pull out of that and display, or the user interface that you put on top of that, that's entirely at your discretion.
That's exactly right. And similarly, anyone else can do that. So even if Odyssey ever started behaving the way that YouTube did, and says, hey, we're going to go corporate, screw the indie guys who made us big, and I'll say that's never going to happen while I'm running the company. But even if it did happen somehow, there's this ability for this new one to simply be sprung up, almost overnight. And because of the design of the underlying technology, like your follower relationships, they're not owned by us. It's similar to Bitcoin, where they're kind of locally owned and locally controlled. So it really is a next generation approach.
It reminds me a bit of a project that I was working on for a while called Before the Ban. The idea being that you would set up a decentralized index of people on different social networks and the people you follow. And then if your account was lost because of censorship, hacking, or any other reason, people could find your new location. So essentially it was a map to get to where the people you follow have gone to and where their content has moved to, so that this layer, I'm trying not to be too technical here, but this layer of abstraction protects you, so that if you are banned in some way, people can still get at what you have created. And to some extent, what you've done is abstracted away the social network itself from the specific implementation. So if you could imagine that you're on Facebook you have a number of links with friends and you have content that you've created, and that lives within the walled garden of Facebook. But in theory, it doesn't have to. It could be that Facebook is just the interface, the visuals that are laid on top of that content and that set of relationships. And even though that particular project hasn't taken off, I'm still a firm believer that this is the future of the internet, and that people should be, whenever possible, taking advantages of networks that allow you, in a sense, to take your network with you.
Exactly. That's exactly our approach. I will say, because we talk about, the bannings and the people who are being outright censored, and in my view, that's a real problem. There are a lot of people who are getting hit by that, and it's completely unfair what's happening to them. At the same time, some of these places that say, oh, you're not banned here, they do become these kinds of darker places, or they're full of a lot of stuff that's like, very, very fringe. And I'm not going to say that there's no fringe content that's available on the platform, but there is like a ton of like very mainstream, very popular stuff. The problems with YouTube go beyond just this kind of censorship. I mean, it's things like they're taking 50% of every ad dollar. They're doing all of these other kinds of exploitative and manipulative things. And so we have content creators. The vast majority of our content creators, they're not facing censorship from YouTube. That's not why they're coming on. They're coming on because they like the idea of their earnings settling right away, earning more from every view, having more control over their identity. Just that idea of ownership is appealing to people. They're aware that when they build up their following on YouTube, they're building on top of quicksand. So even if something hasn't happened to them, something can happen. YouTube can change the rules, and so this idea of being more of an owner rather than being a renter, that's appealing to a lot of people, even people who aren't facing any kinds of challenges from YouTube specifically.
We're almost at a break here, and when we get back, I want to ask you more about the way that idea of ownership of your own identity and the additional benefits of escaping that ecosystem. But I also do want to talk a bit more about what it means to be an alternative in a system where a lot of the people who are going to join your system have been kicked out for one reason or another, and the particular challenges that poses. I am talking with Jeremy Kauffman here on Keys Talk Radio, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Matt Asher Radio Show on Keys Talk FM. And a reminder, all of the radio episodes are turned into a podcast and published to mattasher.com, where you can download them or subscribe in your favorite podcast app. We are talking about Odysee, a video sharing platform, and we were talking about what it implies if you are setting up a network that's an alternative to the established one. And what ends up happening, and this is not unique to what you've done, I've seen this pattern repeat itself many times, if someone sets up a network, a social network, video sharing or other content sharing network that is for anyone, but it's specifically targeted in some ways for the people who've had a bad experience at one of the existing platforms, that will tend to attract a lot of people who have left those platforms without a choice because they were banned. Now, some of those bans are unfair. It's hard to qualify what makes for unfair, but it's certainly the case that a lot of those bans are bans of people who no platform necessarily wants. They're creating content that is, from the perspective of the broader culture, highly undesirable. So what ends up happening at a lot of these is you end up with something like a lemon market, as an analogy to the car market, where the people who sell their used cars are the people who've had really bad experiences with their car and need to unload them, right? These are undesirables in some sense, and I don't want to stigmatize, just undesirable from the perspective of the broader culture. So how do you deal with the possible influx of a large percentage of the people coming in and sharing content that you might go, oh, I don't really want that on our website?
So I think the phenomenon you're describing is true of some alternatives, maybe even many alternatives. We aren't an alternative in my view. We're a successor. We're not simply trying to clone what came before and said, oh, we're just going to allow you to do whatever you want over here. We've built something that's genuinely different, that has genuinely better properties than what's came before. And so are there some of these people who have gotten in trouble on other platforms that are available on Odysee? Yeah, you can go watch Alex Jones on Odysee. Alex Jones is on there, okay? It's not, however, something that's just like marketed to and appealing to these kinds of people. Anyone who loads the Odysee homepage and goes through some of the categories and some of the things you can find there, it's not full of that stuff. That's not what it is. That's not who it's popular with. Are there some of these people on there? Yeah, there are, because we think that we do think some of these other platforms are making mistakes and being way too aggressive and way too political in terms of what they allow. We see people as having the right to make choices for themselves. I will give that as a funny aside. People's perspective on censorship is always like that it's for other people. If you talk to someone and they say like, I think Facebook or Google shouldn't be allowing people to see these kinds of things. You say, oh, well, do you want them to decide for you what you're allowed to see, or would you rather decide for yourself? Pretty much everyone will say they would prefer to decide for themselves. They want the companies to decide for other people, not for themselves. But anyway, because of what we're building has these genuinely better properties. It's not just a knockoff where we're saying come and be crazy or whatever. It's something that we built from the ground up with this next generation approach, with this blockchain based approach, and so it's appealing to really vast variety of people, and we have all kinds of political opinions, we have all kinds of science and engineering videos, we have all kinds of just like funny and wacky and weird videos. It's not like some of those other quote alternatives where you go on there and it feels like, yeah, this is kind of a cesspit. It's a really, really wide variety of stuff. There are several hundred YouTubers with more than 1 million subscribers on YouTube who are now publishing on Odysee, and so it is like it has a lot of mainstream appeal.
Let's talk a little bit about some of those other advantages that you mentioned. Control over identity and earnings settling right away. I don't I think that most people who aren't, and most people aren't top earning YouTube creators or even mid-level YouTube creators, they don't really understand how the online content marketplace at places like Facebook, Facebook to some extent, but more so YouTube work, and how content creators get paid. Maybe you could give a view of how that works and how your own system is different.
Yeah, so typically the way that it works is you're going to publish videos, you're going to have some kind of monetization options in terms of how much you want to be monetizing, and more monetizing usually means more ads. You used to be able to do free videos on YouTube. You can't do that anymore, so YouTube sort of demands that the videos be monetized. And
meaning that you can't run a video without ads. I think they have
correct.
a paid program where you can, but then you're paying to put up the content, right? But in general, you can't just opt out of having ads run on your content.
Yeah, fair. And then you're going to earn some kind of what's called, it's typically given as the acronym, CPM, which is basically what your earnings are going to be per 1,000 views. So a common earning on YouTube, I think this is actually the average, is a couple of dollars, so like $2-3 CPM. So that's, you're making $2 or $3 per 1,000 views. And sometimes I think it's helpful to look at that on a per view basis, right? Which means that like each view is frequently generating a penny, sometimes less than a penny. So video views you're not making that much per view. And if your channel is hitting certain audiences, it can be higher. So if you have a channel where, hey, the audience is really wealthy and they're big spenders, then your CPMs tend to go higher because the advertisers want to market to those people. So at the upper end, channels might be earning a $20 CPM, would be a pretty high CPM to be earning. So that's $20 per 1,000 views. Our approach is we do also do this. The earnings per view. We give creators a choice as to whether or not they want to monetize. We are actually, with the advertising supporting model, I will say this is a bit of a work in progress for us. We started with this blockchain-based monetization, and we still have that system. And so just off of the blockchain-based earnings, people are earning a comparable or higher CPM to YouTube in many cases. And as we build out our advertising system, and we are now doing some ads, our approach is, again, to always give people a choice. So that's really one of our fundamental values in terms of how we design everything is people ought to have a choice. And so in our case, that means that, for example, a viewer should always have the choice to basically be paying the comparable amount. So if a creator is making a $10 CPM, you as a viewer should be able to at least pay the comparable amount and not watch ads. YouTube's approach is frequently to make you pay $10 a month to avoid the ads. That's actually way more than sort of what it's worth. It's really crazy to me how little people's time is worth. According to the advertisers and these sites, where they're saying that the creator's only going to make a penny for you to spend 30 seconds of your time watching an ad, that's kind of crazy. And I think a lot of people would rather pay the penny, rather than spend 30 seconds, watching an advertisement. And so we're taking approaches in that direction. But at the same time, at the end of the day, that is what the advertisers are willing to pay. So we don't claim that there's going to be some free lunch. If you want to do ad-supported content and earn from ads, the CPMs that we're going to offer are going to be comparable to YouTube. We are going to take less of a cut, so creators can earn a little bit more on Odyssey. But it's not. There's no free lunch. We're not promising, hey, you earn 5x or something like that.
Got it. I'm talking with Jeremy Kaufman here about Odyssey, a video sharing website, and the technology that underlies it. One of the things that people don't think about or often realize, maybe this falls into the category of the unknown knowns, is that, of course, yes, all these services are businesses, and they're making these decisions about what content to show based on a variety of different things, and often those are financial considerations. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is generally a black box to the end user. They have no idea why they're seeing this particular thing. The recommendation engine decided this. And what is hidden from them is also a black box, and it's not clear. This is particularly actually an issue for people who upload videos. One of the interviews I did for The Filter, the podcast version of this radio show, was with James Corbett, and he had a huge number of subscribers on YouTube. I think it was something close to 1 million, was producing a lot of great content. And the video that I created talking with him ended up getting a fair number of views on YouTube, but it got a lot more views after he was banned from YouTube and people were searching the website for his content. So I knew immediately when he had been banned from YouTube, because all of a sudden my interview with him was getting a huge number of hits. Now, I knew that because of my own position as someone who's interviewed him, but for regular people on the website, they don't know what they're missing because it's simply gone. And I think that actually has a fairly profound impact on our culture when the number one, I think YouTube is maybe the number 2 website overall on the internet, number 2 or 3, but when such a behemoth has now decided that certain people are unreachable, that's going to have an effect, no?
Absolutely. And I just think it's disturbing. Just the way that it just like they just disappear. They're just gone. Here one day, gone the next. And I think that there's a lot of people that just kind of rubs the wrong way. Like, and James, I know that James is like controversial, but like, he's even if you dislike James, like he's clearly well-intentioned, right? And so it's like this idea that someone like James, shouldn't be allowed to communicate with people. To me, it certainly rubs my sensibilities the wrong way. And that's part of why we came up with this solution and this approach, which says that like, hey, we can't do that. It's baked in, right? When you click the follow button on a channel, that is written to your local cryptocurrency wallet, and that's this kind of like immutable thing that we can't mess up and can't take away from you. James owns his channel. James publishes to Library and Odyssey. James owns his channel. We can't reach into his wallet and take away his channel, and we can't reach into your wallet and take away your relationship with James. And I think that's the way that it ought to be. I think it's strange. Something that I like to do is like think about how we would apply like our moral norms in the physical space and apply them to the digital space. And it's like, look, if you want to be friends with someone, you get to be friends with someone. If you want to have a conversation with someone, you get to have a conversation with someone. Like, it's not my place to be taking your ability to do that away from you.
In essence, what's happening is that these platforms are mediating our relationships. This is certainly true on YouTube. It's also true on all of the other social networks, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. The relationships that we have with other people in this virtual way, and now I think for most of us, most of our relationships are mostly virtual. Most of the communication happens that way. The connections happen sometimes over email, but often first by one of these social networks. And the limits of how those relationships will develop and who they can develop with, those are set by the platforms we use.
Yeah, and that was one of the most disturbing parts about all this to me, and the censorship that happened in 2020 was really unprecedented. And as someone who like follows this stuff semi-obsessively, because we've been doing this for 5 years, maybe longer, and what happened in 2020 was well beyond anything that had ever happened before, and it was happening at a time when people were being told, you're not allowed to leave your house, or you're not supposed to, depending on where you live. Either you're literally not allowed or you're not supposed to. And so you're not allowed to go see your friends. You're not allowed to go hang out with people. You can't go to the coffee shop and have a conversation. The only place we were supposed to be having conversations was online. And then the places online were saying you're not allowed to talk to people there either. And so it was really disturbing to me. Like, during a time in which it's harder than ever to talk in person, we need to be dialing this behavior back, right? Because it's more necessary that people be able to communicate freely online if they can't communicate freely in person. And so we're getting this kind of like double punch where you can't communicate in person and you're not allowed to communicate online. So it really rubbed me the wrong way. I have a whole talk on this. It's like a 45 minutes long, just like me going through all the censorship examples and how crazy they are and how unprecedented they were. So I'm a bit of like an encyclopedia on this, and I don't need to necessarily go into it unless you want me to. But it really is something that should be disturbing to I think it should be disturbing to everyone.
Well, when we come back from the break, I'm going to give my own thoughts about how it is that I think that those platforms ended up being so aggressive in terms of censoring and managing relationships between people. What brought that about? I think it is actually related to the huge increase in the use of those platforms during the lockdowns. But we will be right back here with Jeremy Kaufman on Keys Talk FM. Welcome back to the Matt Asher Radio Show on Keys Talk FM. I am talking with Jeremy Kaufman, CEO of Odysee, a video sharing platform, and we were discussing censorship and the role that these social media networks play in essence, managing our relationships with other people who are also on the platform. And we were talking about the relationship between the increased level of censorship, which I think pretty much everybody agrees spiked up highly in 2020, and the fact that all of us, almost all of us, were stuck at home and doing much more online, including using these networks much more. My own take on this is that the more important these networks became, the more they became, in essence, politically in play. In other words, if you think about lobbying as an activity, and lobbying doesn't just mean lobbying the government, it can mean lobbying a private company or attacking them for behaviors that you don't like, the return that you get on that increases as the value of that property goes up. The more people who are on it, the more important it is, if you're a political actor, to try to get your opponents knocked off that platform. The more people who are spending time at home watching those videos, if you're a political advocate, the more important it is to you to get those other people off the site if you can. One of the things that happened right around 2020, a little bit before that, was that networks like Facebook and YouTube dipped their first toes into the waters of censorship when it came not just to banning content that was illegal or offensive, kind of beyond the pale, but also to knocking off content or shadow banning or those other methods it has to suppress content, knocking off those pieces of content that were merely not in ideological alignment with a certain group of people. And once they began to do that, once they dipped their toe into those waters, once they, unplugged that dam, however you want to analogize that created a battlefield. It sent a signal to everyone else out there that, hey, the way to win may not be to create content that's better than the other people out there, more persuasive, whatever it is. The way to do this may be to lobby the refs or threaten the refs or whatever else it is. In essence, it put the idea of the rules of what content is permissible into play, and everyone out there was like, oh yeah, the new game isn't create the content, the new game is force the hand of Facebook or YouTube to remove the content of people we don't like.
Yeah, I completely agree with that idea that it kind of, what's the term for it, but it made the concept known, and then it became something that people wanted to do. And so as they began expanding their rules and their policies in terms of what they'd be willing to act on, it also was this sort of self-reinforcing effect where it amplified the calls for them to do it more and more. And I also think it normalized it inside of the companies as well, where the people who are working at these companies, they became aware that, oh, our company can do this now. We have the ability to do this now. The rules have changed, and you saw more agitation even within the companies. And I think that's actually a substantial part of what's going on here, where if you look at you can look at the major Silicon Valley companies, and it's true of all of them, where it's basically 95% plus donate to Democrats versus Republicans. And if you've got that much of an ideological slant, it's very difficult for people to be objective. I wouldn't claim that I'm an objective person. Everyone has these interprets things subjectively based off of their own biases. And so if you have a company that's where almost everyone is of one political slant, you're going to get groupthink, right? Your best bet, if you to the extent that we can do well, you need a mix of opinions and a mix of perspectives, so that at least those biases can maybe cancel each other out or get counterbalanced. But I think what we've seen is that they're very slanted in one direction, and it also has to do with the kinds of people who work there.
For sure, it does. That it's another form of the battlefield is within the company. And actually related to that, what have you done in terms of your own company to try to insulate from those pressures, or do you lean into those in some way?
Well, we try to be an apolitical company. We try to, and we have a mixture of ideologies of the people who work here. One thing we do sort of press people on is that we do want you to have a very pro freedom of speech, freedom of expression kind of orientation, and so that's especially true of anyone who's in a position of moderating. And so we're trying to really only rein in things that are hey, this is a clear call to violence. This is clearly illegal. It's clearly legal. This kind of thing, and to try to get, we're trying to make sure that the people who are put in those positions, that is their orientation, and that they're not going to start saying, oh, because I'm a Democrat or because I'm a Republican or a Libertarian or whatever they might be, that they're going to, try to put their ideology in terms of their moderation actions.
I think that one of the cultural changes we've seen that has made those voices within companies lobbying them about content on the platform much louder, much harder to ignore, is that we're in an era of reputational contagion. It used to be that the people who sold products were somewhat insulated both from the reputation of the company of the product they were selling and also from their customers. I've spoken before about the idea of bourgeois values, where someone comes into your store to buy a shoe and you don't care if he's a good human being in some particular moral system. You don't care about any kind of orientation that he has. You don't care if he wants a woman's shoe and tries it on. It doesn't matter to you. What matters is that he comes in, pays you for it, and gets out, right? And you are, in a sense, indifferent to the ideology of this particular person. But nowadays, certain ideologies, a lot of ideologies that aren't shared. This seems to be especially a thing among the progressive left. Anyone outside of their ideological framework is tarnished, and any interactions you have with them that are of a commercial nature tarnish you. So the idea is you don't want to platform anyone who is toxic. Anyone who is toxic, who has toxic ideologies, they're contagious. This is, in general, a time of contagion, and that toxicity spreads. So if you are a platform that hosts content that a particular group within the company considers toxic, it's not enough for them just to say that at that company, well, we host a variety of different viewpoints and we're not endorsing it by putting on it on our platform. In the modern era, just putting it on the platform contaminates you with the toxicity of the content or the toxicity of the people who are on there. Do you see what I'm saying?
I completely agree, and it's it's a very sort of like foreign psychology to me. So I can attempt to I try to like empathize with it and understand it, so that I can at least get where they're coming from. But it's so strange to me, because again, my intuition is much more like, well, like, look, if I was running a coffee shop or if I was running a restaurant and like people had political beliefs that I disagreed with, like, yeah, they can eat there and they can have a conversation. I think that we're more productive people. We're more efficient. We have a more efficient system. Like, everything works better if we don't demand ideological conformity from every vendor and every person we're buying things from. And it's just like, I just can't. I want to buy a good pair of shoes. I want to get a good meal. I want to get whatever. Like, I tend to be much more towards like, well, like, let's just pick up the thing itself and see if this is a good offer or a good deal or not. And so, I completely agree with the phenomenon. I think it's a strange one. I think it's also a self-defeating one. I'll say this, because in the same reason that might get me in trouble. Like, racism is bad. Racism is also inefficient. Like, if you attempted to be more closed off in terms of how you run a community or run an economy, you're going to get out-competed by the people that aren't, right? An economy that's multicultural and inclusive is going to outcompete an economy that says, hey, only one type of person can be in this economy. And I think that if the progressives continue to go in that, and it's not all progressives, I want to be clear. We have lots of progressives on the platform. We have some very pro-free speech progressives that you can watch on Odyssey. We have the Young Turks on, all these other people. So I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but that for the people who have that mindset of like, I need to agree with someone to do to transact with them economically, I think it's going to end up being self-defeating, because they're going to be in this bubble, and everyone else is going to still be in that more interoperative way of working, and so. I don't know. Maybe that's. I will say I'm like an inveterate optimist. It's really tough to get me to be pessimistic. So maybe I'm just being an optimist there. But it's been strange to watch, where like all kinds of things, your chicken sandwich, your beans, cans of beans got politicized in 2020, where it's like, you're buying this one type of bean, then you're a Republican, and if you're buying this other type of bean, you're a Democrat. And it's definitely, it's strange times. It's a little disturbing, for sure.
We're almost out of time on the radio part of the show. Are you okay to stick around on the for the extra podcast after party segment?
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks for having me on.
Great, sure thing. One. I do have time for one more question here on the radio. I wanted to ask you about your favorite creators on the platform. Maybe you could give a shout out to them. Who are they?
Sure. I mean, I like a lot of the like science and engineering type stuff. So like the Veritasiums, I really like 3 Blue 1 Brown as a creator that you can watch. Outside of that area, there's a creator named J-Reg who does this. It is political, but it's not anyone. He calls himself an anti-centrist, and he does all these sort of like comedic sketches from all the different corners of the political compass. And I think that channel's pretty funny.
Awesome. We'll be sure to check those out. And for all of the listeners, this is odyssee.com, right?
That's right. And follow Matt on there as well. Channel's Matt Asher. So smash that subscribe button and help Matt build his following on Odyssey.
Excellent. Thank you to all the radio listeners. We will pick it back up on the podcast version. I'm going to begin by asking about some legal issues that the company has had, and we'll go into crypto a bit and maybe some political stuff. So please go to mattasher.com. A little bit after this show airs, we will upload all of the content there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Welcome to the Matt Asher Radio Show After Party, otherwise known as the Filter Podcast. We're going to pick right back up. The library platform has a token, and this token is part of how it operates. I think we can be a little bit more technical now. Maybe you could give a view into how that works and what the role of that token is in the platform, and then what the role of crypto is generally in what you're doing.
Yeah, I prefer to call it like the library network or something like this, because it isn't. Platforms are typically centralized. Maybe you could call BitTorrent a platform. I don't know, but it's in our case it's basically like combining a public blockchain with a BitTorrent-like data network. So what that means is the library blockchain is its own public blockchain. It's not built on Ethereum or anything like this. It's separate. It's been live for years. No problems. Very solid technology. Vetted by IEEE. And when you publish, what you're doing is you're making a blockchain record. You're making a blockchain transaction. Included in that is metadata, so data about data. This includes things like the title, who published it, all of these things. The publish gets signed by an identity. These identities also exist on the blockchain. And included in that metadata is a pointer to a BitTorrent-like data network. And so really, and in the early days, we used to call it this. We said that library was like, if Bitcoin and BitTorrent had a baby. And that was actually the original sort of conception of the idea, was just kind of combining those two things, because BitTorrent, while it's a beautiful technology, it has a bunch of problems. It has a problem of there's no coherent catalog. It has problems of legitimacy because it lacks monetization